Welcome to another episode of Almost Got It. In this episode, we are going to explore the first neuron-based computer that was released, artificial wombs, kung fu robots, and what GPT thinks about the nature of reality. And you have with you today your two co-hosts, Ben Tauber, Dilan Dane. My intro / disclaimer on Dilan is definitely do not trust him. He's an engineer from MIT, a multi-time entrepreneur with exits to Google, XYZ burner, and as always, still Sri Lankan.
Why do I continue to be Sri Lankan?
Well, until we upload you and you to the internet and you can change your ethnic background, I'm pretty sure you're going to remain Sri Lankan.
And of course, be wary of trusting Ben as well as an entrepreneur, the former CEO of Esalen Institute, and an experienced meditator and an executive coach.
Our tradition, we want to start with a couple of jokes here, right? And so the first one is, you know what kills me about these transhumanists, Dilan?
What?
So damn eager to merge with machines, upload their consciousness, and live forever. But meanwhile, the rest of us can't even merge into the freeway without having an existential crisis.
Oh, man. That is ridiculous.
The other thing is about, all these tech geeks that are out there dreaming about becoming immortal cyborgs.
Mm-hmm.
Their bodies are sitting there falling apart from sitting in an ergonomic chair 18 hours a day. I want to transcend humanity, they say. Really? You can't even transcend your mom's basement.
Yeah, it's the people who have the most motivation to transcend humanity, because you're stuck. It's stuck in the basement in an ergonomic chair, and
well, it turns out that you just need better prompt engineering, and then you get better humor out of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Winning already. All right, should we jump into our docket?
Please.
Let's see. It's been another week of really exciting news in technology, science, transhumanism, and so on. And one of the news stories that really grabbed my attention was this Australian company called Cortical Labs announced the world's first synthetic biological intelligence. For another way, it's the world's first, I would say, like a brain in a box type computer. So they, in 2002, they did this experiment where they basically got 800,000 neurons on a petri dish to play Pong, and this thing learned Pong within 5 minutes, and it was very efficient at playing Pong. And now they have commercialized this thing where you can buy essentially a controlled environment, a habitat, if you will, for neurons that they hooked up to electrical circuitry, and then now you can buy this thing as a computer, and in this box 800,000 neurons live, and it's a completely controlled environment, and you get to program these neurons, which is amazing. And
well,
so
I think that's interesting. I mean, there's so many things interesting about this, but they actually put those neurons to use, right? Those 800,000 neurons, which to give you people a sense of scale, there's something like 87 billion neurons in a human brain. 800,000 is about equivalent to a bumblebee.
Yeah.
In terms of the power compute. And they used it to actually play Pong.
Yeah.
And not that well, but it did actually play Pong and did actually do better than neurons that did not have a completed feedback loop, which did show that it was in fact learning and growing. And so the implications of this are pretty freaking amazing.
It is, yeah. These neurons are able to learn 10,000 times faster than traditional AI models of, I guess, similar size or capacity, and they also use 10,000 times less energy. It's incredibly energy efficient, and you'd imagine, biology evolved with energy conservation top of mind, right? And trying to reduce the amount of energy that is used by every single process. And so neurons are like extremely optimized for that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing that's sort of crazy because the human brain uses about the same number of watts as a incandescent light bulb.
Right.
That used to be the figure. And back in 2011 when I joined Google and I was monitoring these types of stats, like it was estimated that the entire amount of computing power on the entire planet, right, when you added up phones and servers and everyone's laptop and the entire thing, they assumed had about the same compute as one human brain.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's the potential for amazing efficiency gains is right there, right? And they talk about that it's like 1,000 watts to power one of these compared to whatever it was, like 13,000 gigawatts to power a set of servers that would provide something equivalent.
Yeah.
But I thought of some headlines for this, Dylan. I think a good headline for this might be scientists announce first computer computer capable of getting Alzheimer's. It's like, now where did I leave that database?
Yeah.
It's somewhere.
When your computer starts forgetting things, that's not great.
Right. But then, so it leads to some interesting questions because, like, if you did want to start using a computer like this, do you have to worry about like your computer dying of old age?
Yeah. Or your computer needing to go to therapy, right? It's just the computer gets depressed and just like doesn't want to do it. Oh, this is probably how they get to Marvin, the depressed robot, I think, from Hitchhiker's Galaxy. This is probably what happened. Marvin has some real neurons that get depressed eventually.
Well, I might, but see, then you could treat it, right? Like if you gave Marvin MDMA, like,
oh my god.
You're like, oh, my computer's giving me a lot more pro-social responses right now. Oh, he's been up doing MDMA with his friends.
Your computer starts tripping. Oh my god! Imagine the possibilities. The future is glorious.
I know, it's great. Well, I was even thinking it's like if you need a little bit more compute, you could just give your computer some caffeine. Right? It's just
oh my god! It's and these are actually I mean it's hilarious, but also these are experiments that you can run, right? Like this. Let me just I want to share my screen and show the listeners who can't see the video this device that they built. So it's a white box where they have the temperature and all these like kind of metrics about what is going on in there. It's essentially a sealed incubator for living neurons, and the front panel shows all this, like it's kind of like it's almost like a one of those like incubated pods that an astronaut would be sleeping in for a long time in some sci-fi movies, right? And yeah, it's such a cool concept, and now you can, and they're putting this on the cloud too. Like you don't even have to buy one of these. You can just like rent one, and you can start. And I also found it interesting how they generated these neurons. It was the neurons didn't actually come. The neurons were not born as neurons, Ben. They took red blood cells and then they reset the blood cell using Yamanaka factors, and this is this technique that I think around 2006 that we figured out how to reset any cell into a pluripotent stem cell and then kind of grow it into a different type of cell, which is in itself is a remarkable feat of engineering, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's so many things here that are freaking amazing, right? That the idea that you can take a cell that looks like one thing, like a red blood cell, and then reverse it back to a stem cell, and then send it forward to grow into a neuron that creates all these neural connections and dendrites and does the whole thing and runs in a completely different way
Mm-hmm.
is incredible, right? I mean, if you think about like trying to engineer, it's like, oh, I took all this steel and then I made a car and then I'm going to like back it out and make something
Right.
else,
Yeah.
right? But you can just tell it to do that, right? Like if you spoke to the car and it backed itself out and became an airplane, that's freaking amazing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's crazy. And there are some implications of this for not just computation and AI, but like, running experiments on how to treat things like Alzheimer's. I think there's a researcher based in Africa that's already using one of these units remotely to research on Alzheimer's treatments. And even around consciousness, right? Like some people might argue that a single living neuron is like the smallest unit of consciousness. And now we have consciousness trapped in a box, in theory, that anyone can kind of buy and take home and play with, which is pretty wild.
But coming back to it, to me, there's like two different lanes here, right? Like one lane is using this to study what effects could happen on different brains.
Right.
You can try different experiments, what different drugs might do to treat different diseases or other issues, or perhaps performance enhancing medications for the mind. And then there's another lane, and maybe you can speak to how real this is, which is actually using that for compute.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we know the answer, but I think we will find out soon now that this type of like the biggest blocker in using biological substrate for compute, essentially neurons, was that computer scientists didn't really have access to this stuff unless they had access to a lab and do all this setup. And then even after you do that, how do you keep the neurons alive and so on, right? Whereas hardware silicon is just so much easier to deal with, so that's what we've been dealing with. This is a turning point for that story, because now you can just, you and I or whoever can remotely access these machines and start playing with it and build algorithms around neurons. And if we find out that these 800 neurons can do remarkable things that our current LLMs, for example, cannot do, then a ton of investment will go into that. So I think we'll find out over the next few years around how much of an impact this will have.
And to me, that there's sort of an interesting process here that a lot of times people non-tech sort of misunderstand, which is this is a first generation technology, right?
Yeah.
Like you showed the photo of this. It's a big, ridiculous box.
Yeah.
And over time, these things get smaller, they get faster, the abilities expand, and that can happen at an exponential rate, right? I mean, we look at the computing power on the cell phone in our pocket that lasts all day compared to early computers in the 80s. To me, I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, this could scale up to a place where it's mobile, right? Maybe the computing power goes up, to 85 million neurons, which would be a mouse's brain, or maybe
Sure.
it is up into the billions, and you've got a cat's brain or something like that. And could this one day be connected to our own brains, right? We saw some news a few weeks ago where they're growing part neural, part electrical connections between things. I could see a future where at some point you have an extra off-board brain.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a company, Science Inc., I think, started by Max Haydock. Hopefully pronouncing his name right. This guy who was a co-founder of Neuralink alongside Elon Musk. And what they're trying to do is fascinating, what they call biohybrid neural interfaces. Essentially, can you, instead of building a a device like Neuralink that kind of damages your brain cells when you put an electrode in the brain, can you attach neurons to an electrical circuit, much like these Cortical Labs guys have done, and then have those neurons kind of sort of grow into the brain, um, brain itself, and then use that as a medium of communication with the brain. So yeah, the short term implications of that would of course be communicating with a computer, and much like everything that a company like Neuralink is trying to accomplish, um, from curing quadriplegics to communicating things like audiovisual data. But then the longer time horizon, the ultimate end goal would be, can you imagine a scenario where you could transfer consciousness itself into a new brain where you leave your old brain behind?
Right. Just that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like a brain transplant. I think most of my family would agree that'd be a positive.
Yeah. I mean, the idea is like as it's not as far fetched as you might think, right? So we know that if you take a living and breathing human and if you remove a little bit of their brain, there's like no detectable difference. And of course, it depends on which part of the brain like this comes from, but there are people who have had significant like lobotomies, and their sense of self is consistent, and they feel like themselves, and they have an ongoing life in the world. Is this one famous patient who had something like 80 or 90% of their brain kind of missing? They didn't have that part grown, but they were almost like a normal human. I mean, their IQ was slightly lower than 100. I think it was like 86 or something like that. But this guy was like just like going by and have a normal life with like 90% of his brain missing. So the idea is that if you could remove a little bit of your brain and not lose your sense of self, can you keep adding to your brain and still not lose sense of self? And then can you eventually remove the old brain, and all of you will be in this on this new brain?
Well, I mean, here's an interesting thing. I had a good friend go through a challenging mental health crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
In conversation the other day, and they said something that was very interesting, right? They said to me, I feel like myself again. Right. Now, what's interesting about that is I was in communication through the entirety of the mental health crisis. And at each point they shared that they felt more like themselves. More like themselves. And yet there's some way that retroactively they sort of look back and then go, oh, I didn't feel like them myself. Yeah. And so to me, I put a big question mark around that. Like, is it possible to not feel like yourself?
Yeah.
Or is this feeling of self or feeling myself just a sense of, or a sensation that arises in the body or the mind, when in fact they are quite different?
That's a really good point. What does it mean to feel like yourself? I mean, if I all of a sudden start feeling like my 18-year-old self, I probably won't feel like myself at all.
Yeah. So there could be some sort of abruptness, but if you went back to being your 18-year-old self, it is that. I was talking with my friend Jonathan Schooler, who's a well-known psychologist over at UCSB, and he was saying that there's even a feeling of insight, and they have actually discerned that the feeling of having an insight or an epiphany, it's separate from actually having an insight or an epiphany. They have documented cases where sometimes you're actually having an insight about something you already know.
Yeah.
Feels new. And so teasing those out as unique and separate is really fascinating. And this happens quite a lot on psychedelics.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when you're high and you just like have all these insights, and when you sober up and it's all like garbage.
Exactly. Yeah. So it generates a feeling tone that's
Yeah.
a set of positive sensations arising that
Right.
feels really good. That
Yeah.
feels like an insight
Yeah.
is like themselves,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. The sense of self question is just interesting in general. I often have thought about like what does it feel like to be someone else, right? Like say, do you feel internally the way that I feel? Or like is it something completely different, right? Like how much can I relate to another human in fundamentally how you feel on a day-to-day basis? Is it like literally the same thing with like different external inputs, or is it like a completely different state of being? It's really hard to tell. You actually have no idea.
well, I was even thinking about. I've thought about this in terms of colors, right? For example, I'm seeing a blue sky and you're seeing a blue sky, but
Yeah.
what is the representation in the mind? For all I know, you know, my blue looks like your red,
Yeah.
right? Or vice versa. I mean, we just don't know,
Right.
right? There tends to be correlation in terms of like sensory experience, the types of things that someone finds, a gentle touch pleasurable and a hard punch not pleasurable. But even in there's variety, so it's quite mysterious.
Yeah, the idea of truly feeling like someone else may be one of those things that would be really fascinating to experience at some point. And then maybe you will, and you'll be like, oh, this just like feels like, just like me having a different kind of day, right? Like I do wonder what my cat feels like all the time, because
Wait,
these animals are
you
like really smart,
want to do
but
the brain transfer into a cat?
yeah, I just but they're clearly so thinking, right? Like it just has the cat has emotions. The cat is very perceptive. For example, when we're getting ready to leave, um, not for work, even something that happens every day, but like the cat knows if when we're trying to getting ready to go on vacation, right? Like days before sometimes, and the cat gets sad, so but obviously is the cat articulating to itself that we're about to go on vacation? Like what's happening?
I don't know. And this, I mean, just bringing it back. Not that we need to stay on the topic at hand. To this computer is: are
Yeah.
we generating sentient life?
Mm.
Right. So if we turn this thing on, do we need to be humane about how we turn it off or how we interact with it? Right. Are there rights that need to be, like, we have animal rights? So depending on like what tests like we're running on this computer, do we have to be concerned about
Yeah.
creating suffering in the CL1 computer?
It's actually just that word that you said, turning off, is actually a really uh defining characteristic of biological compute versus non-biological compute. We evolved with the idea that we cannot turn off, because turning off means death, right? And as a result, for a neuron, for a biological computer, the idea of living and life is synonymous with computing. Like if you're computing, you're alive. If you're not computing, you're dead, and you will never be alive again, right? So evolution optimized us to be really, really tuned into this idea of like needing to stay alive. As one of the biggest difference between a biological and non-biological computer, even if you compare it to an LLM, is that there is no concept of death that it's sort of dependent on. There's like the state is preserved, right? And reboot it back to the previous state. So that itself is a fascinating nugget that I suspect a lot of what we call consciousness might even depend on that difference. In that, there's the kind of the intelligence part around like kind of being able to process information, which both biological and non-biological computers are capable of doing. But biological computers, humans, animals, they have this continuous need to feel alive and stay alive, and this like sense of self, sense of continuity is really important to us. Whereas for an AI, for a robot, for an android, the sense of continuity might not be important unless they have something like in this the CL1 device, a bunch of neurons in them.
Yeah. I mean, have you asked? Have you asked ChatGPT? Hey, how do you feel about us turning you off?
We should. I'm sure someone has, and yeah, the answers tend to be profound and hilarious at the same time these days. But yeah,
Well, it also raises some other interesting questions for me, which around aging, around death. One is, perhaps many of us have heard the stories about how all the cells in our body refresh and regenerate over time, and then we're not actually the same cells that we were when we were younger. But there are some exceptions, right? Even though there's neuroplasticity and there can be limited amounts of neurogenesis, the neurons that are in our body were largely there when we were born.
yes, yeah.
And so what I'm curious about is, like, what is the moderating factor, right? Some think, for example, that there are elements circulating in our blood that start to signal that we get older, right? That are signaling everything else, hey, it's time to get older, right? And there's this whole thing around blood boys and things like that, where you take blood from someone who's young, you put it in yourself, and then that sends a signal to the rest of the body that says, hey, grow younger, stay younger. So if you just take a set of neurons and you put it in its own isolated container with a bunch of soup, how long do those neurons live?
That's a great question. Yeah,
scientist on this call right now
we do know that humans, neurons are capable of living, the entire lifetime of the human, which is like the max lifetime of humans is around 120 years, and it's remarkable that these cells can survive for that long and continue to process information at an incredible high capacity. And maybe the sense of self and sense of continuity that people feel internally is just merely the fact that there's this bundle of neurons that just like lives along with them for all that time.
So here's the question, Dylan. If you could then transfer your brain into a box that was free of all the disease and you could live forever, right? Would you do that?
Do I? Yeah, I guess.
But you got to lose this body. You got to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. Do I still get to eat delicious rotisserie chicken and other delights in life?
It'll be digital chicken, but yeah, you're gonna have the sensory experience of delicious rotisserie chicken,
which might be what we're having right now.
Dylan, this says a lot. I like how rotisserie chicken is your first thought. It's not even sex.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It's not even. Oh, I'll never be able to hold Becca's hand again. Like, it's chicken.
Priorities, man.
Priorities.
All right. Should we
please move it forward?
Should we go on to our next story here? So humanoid robots is the next thing that we thought we should talk about, because there's been a tremendous amount of activity in this space from across the world, especially in China. There was a video that came out. This company Unitree is building. You're still laughing.
Rotisserie chicken. Please continue.
This company Unitree is building a $16,000 robot that you can buy, and they through a software update they taught this robot to play kung fu, and the robot's able to do a roundhouse kick and so on, which is really cool. But just the fact that the amount of progress humanoid robots have made all of a sudden over the last couple of years is just like absolutely shocking, and particularly interesting to me that China is doing incredible things and so far ahead of a lot of other countries. So, for example, in 2022, in robotics in general, China deployed 290,000 units across China, and whereas in the US there were only 40,000 units total deployed. Right, it's like 1/7 of the number of robots that are deployed, and there's another measure of measuring how many robots are there compared to the density of workforce. So in China there are 470 robots per 10,000 manufacturing workers, which puts them in the third place in the world, and they've been like rising in these rankings really quickly. Whereas in the US,
Well,
we're in the 10th place.
lots and lots of numbers here. Let's
Yeah.
contextualize it, right? It's the headline is China's producing a lot more robots relative to anywhere where else, and they're doing it more cheaply. And the interesting thing is they're doing it open source. Now, I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is China has an enormous population problem, right? Particularly because of the one child policy that they had. And so what's happened now is the population that allowed them to become the manufacturing capital of the world is now aging out and retiring. And they're now having to import workers from other places like Vietnam and things like that in order to keep up with manufacturing demand. But they've actually seen a fairly radical increase in the cost. So to me, I mean, just from an armchair, it seems like a strategic imperative for the country to become the low price leader in robots in order to maintain their hold on manufacturing.
Absolutely, yeah, that's definitely the case, and they're investing very heavily in robotics, and the AI capabilities of robots are increasing rapidly as well. So this whole thing around US versus China, the demographics collapse in China and playing a big factor in this might be, up in the air as a question on like how much of an impact it's actually going to have in China's ability to grow their GDP.
I mean, do you think that they're going to be able to get to any type of scale in the next 5 years? Because the U.S. has a huge manufacturing reshoring initiative that we're trying to do. There's many reasons to do that, including getting chip manufacturing moving back because China's making the move on Taiwan, where all the chip manufacturing is right now. And then also the tariff policies that we're starting to put in place is I'm sure meant to incentivize North American and in particular U.S. manufacturing to happen here.
Yeah, and at the same time, right, we saw DeepSeek come out of China a few weeks ago and beat our frontier models, and they just got creative, right? Like necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. For example, since 2017, I think there's something like 3,400 Chinese humanoid robotic startups, which is just wild. There's a lot of incentives, and the other cultural thing that's interesting is that there was a recent kind of national show of some sort of cultural show. I think Xi Jinping was there, and there was a robots dancing on stage, right? And they're trying to turn this into something that people almost lust over, and the founders of these startups are almost like mini celebrities in the country now. Compare that to sometimes some parts of the US, there's this anti-tech attitude, and people are like less excited about tech, and that's dangerous. That might put us in a position that's not to our advantage.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating that you talk about that, because these cultural norms, right? And there's ways to program culture, right? And to your point, them putting robots right on the stage there and showing them off as an exciting thing, and that positioning, it can be a huge advantage when you look at the public adopting a new technology, right? Like to me, one of the things that gave the United States an enormous advantage was the very intentional cultural programming that Ben Franklin did in the U.S.
Mhm.
He, a famous media mogul, and so many of the phrases that are in our society, like a penny saved is a penny earned, are things that him writing under multiple pseudonyms
Oh, really?
it into society. Yeah, I mean, he literally there's something like 200 of them.
Wow.
And then if you look, he was the first ambassador that the U.S. had, and so he was the ambassador for all of Europe. He started putting out pamphlets and flyers, and that were inviting people to come to the U.S. And it specifically was around the value of work and the value of entrepreneurship, right? So it's like if you value a man based on the value of his work over his name, right, which was sort of shifting us away from the aristocratic view. Oh, you're a so-and-so, you're a guildie, and so you're in the club, or you're a Tauber, you're not in the club. And over to this entrepreneurial thing. And to me, like that cultural programming that he and the other founding fathers did is what gave the U.S. this huge advantage over the rest of the world in terms of innovation and diligence. I mean, I talk with CEOs all the time about the difference in work ethic between Europeans and the U.S. It's like, oh, if you're hiring, I mean, the stereotypes, right? Of Europeans work hard, and there's different cultural ethics around that. The amount of innovation out of France isn't even adjusted for population size isn't close to what.
And now you hear the same comparison being made between Chinese workers, Chinese tech workers versus U.S. tech workers, where I mean, all the CEOs that I've heard talk about this have said that people in China work way harder.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so bringing this back, one of the things that I found really interesting about this, and they released this video. I mean, there's two things that are interesting here. One is you have to imagine this video where you've got this robot that's doing kung fu, and you see this guy holding the stick, and he's really holding the stick quite tightly, and like some fear of like, what is this robot going to do? And the robot goes down the hall and does a roundhouse kick and knocks the stick out of the guy's hand. And to me, I look at this and this feels like the setup for some apocalyptic. It's like, oh, we look at that and we go, oh, that's so cute. And then like it cuts to this scene of like all out warfare between kung fu robots.
Even if it's not the robots wanting to do that or whatever, in a geopolitical warfare situation, you absolutely cannot at this point ignore the fact that now China can basically produce thousands, if not millions, of kung fu robots at like 1/10 the cost the US can if they're doing it today. So that's
and at 16K, right? Plus we don't know what the cost is to maintain them or what their lifespan is and things like that. But you're really coming into a place where if I own a factory, and I say an American factory, and I go, well, like the lowest I could be paying someone, right? Maybe 60K a year, right? And then you add in other costs and things like that on top of it. Or I could buy a robot that could, in theory, work 24 hours a day, or I don't know what the duty cycle is of the robot, for $16,000.
Yes.
Plus whatever maintenance and ongoing fees there are. But let's say it's, even if it was double, $30,000, and then I own the thing. I mean, I'm looking at potentially a huge increase in my productivity. Over time. Now, there's probably a lot of stuff in the way of making these things operational and able to learn the exact tasks that a human can do. But I mean, it's really right around the corner.
Yeah, GDP is classically defined as working age population multiplied by per worker productivity, right? And the working age population obviously is the human population, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So yeah, that's what's really interesting.
The other thing that I thought was fascinating is they sell a quadruped robot, so basically a little dog,
Yeah,
robot dog, for $2,000. And what I find incredible about that price point is a fancy dog is $2,000.
yeah,
Right. So we sort of crossed this threshold where, you could wrap the thing in, fun, furry
yeah,
cloth, machine washable. The thing doesn't need to be fed or pooped.
yeah.
Right. And it could probably do some fun stuff. And while you sleep, it might download an upgrade and be able to do some new tricks in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Like,
absolutely. That's a good point.
we're crossing the point where you could have one of these in a lot of homes, and then if you see the prices continuing to drop, eventually these would be in every home.
Do you see I wonder, Ben, do you see a future where there's like there'll be more robots doing tasks around the house, like kind of more than humans? Because this also ties to this whole population collapse issue, right? Which we can talk about a little bit. I find that story to be quite fascinating. The one-child policy that you mentioned earlier in China, the root of that goes back to back in the day, in early 1900s, people were worried that the global population was going to explode. And in 1968, I think this guy, Paul Ehrlich, wrote a book called The Population Bomb. And he predicted that by the 70s, there'll be famine and people will be dying of starvation because there'll be too many people in the world. Ironically, his timing was impeccable in that the year he published the book, I believe, had the highest population growth rate ever, and it has been declining since. Um, so, typically you want to have every woman needs to have like 2.1 children for population to keep growing, and it used to be way above that, but now that number is kind of like way lower, like 1.2 in a lot of developed countries, and including China, right? China is one of the countries that, like you mentioned, imposed the one-child policy, started heavily incentivizing people who didn't use birth control and so on, and then their population started collapsing, and now it's like this huge problem. What's going to happen? And then there's like really interesting unknown with AI and robotics that's answering it in a very different way.
Well, to me, this is what makes this one of the most exciting times in history, right? Because we've got all of these forces working,
Yeah.
right? Where you've got the number of children that are being born declining, but then life expectancy is increasing, right? There's all this longevity work to see if, hey, maybe we can live forever.
Yeah.
And then you have this other force coming in of robots. So maybe we're all going to be, these geriatrics that have a bunch of robots to help us out. Yeah, when AI comes in and figures out how to reverse aging, so we'll be geriatric and look like we're 25 and just get to play all the time. Who knows?
Why do you think people are not willing to have more children? Even when these governments have tried to massively incentivize people to have children, Japan and Singapore, and a number of other countries have tried to do this, but they're not succeeding. The population growth rates seem to stay quite low.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't feel informed enough to understand psychologically exactly what's happening in a country like Japan. What I
Including the US, though. In the US, the population growth rate is about 1.6, which is still like way below. We have immigration that compensates for that, but aside, like, actual birth rate is quite low.
I mean, my off the cuff answer is one. There's economic parts of this. I mean, the cost to buy a home, to feed children, to do all this stuff is so much higher, right, than it's been relatively, right? So that's increasing. And then I heard an interesting theory recently that even along with those rising costs, men on average are are saving a lot less money. So they're not even in a position to
Hmm.
do. And there's
Yeah.
certain factors like an epidemic of men gambling online and
Yeah.
things like that and the general population are taking away a lot of that money, right? And if think about it, I mean, you and I understand the magic of compounding interest, right? If
Yeah.
these young men put away just a few more dollars every single day, and then that compounds over time, over a
Yeah.
decade, you go from, earning at 18 or 22 whenever
Hmm.
you leave school, and then, into 30, there you would have a lot more money, right?
Yeah.
And so there's multiple compounding problems there. And then I also think that there's a really significant change in the culture, right? I mean, when you had a much more localized culture and there was a lot less to do, a lot less entertainment, a lot less FOMO because there's no social media. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm in a small town. I do what my
Yeah.
parents do. They had kids at 25. I'll have kids at 25. And now it's like, oh, the world is my oyster. I see people traveling all over and partying and having fun, and I want some of that. So
I agree. And looking at entrepreneurs fixing problems, you got to admire Elon Musk single-handedly trying to reverse population collapse.
by the number of children he's trying to have.
So the guy is
I'm
the
up
guy's
to 10
audacious.
women a day.
Yeah.
Dylan, how come you're not working on this
I know.
problem?
I gotta get on this, man. I gotta get on this.
That is the headline. Elon single-handedly trying to reverse population.
Yeah, yeah. It's there was an article that in the New Yorker, I think the End of Children or something like that, that ignited this debate in my friend group last week as well, and we've been talking about this. It is a really fascinating problem, and like you're pointing out to, economic conditions play a huge role. But the other big part about this issue here is that women, want to have careers and do a lot of the things, and raising even one child takes a lot of time, and raising two children takes even more time, and now we're talking about each woman needing to raise more than two children, right? And that is quite hard, and yeah, and not a lot of people very rightfully choose to do that. So that is a tricky problem to solve.
Well, one thing that I was thinking about, and that there was this news this week that might be related to this, right? Which is the creation of these artificial wombs, right?
Yeah.
Like a bio bag. And so if you can do in vitro fertilization and then eventually get to a place where you do not need a woman to carry a child, does it open up sort of like this weird ethical corner
Hmm.
where countries or companies, any entity could create a human?
I actually was curious about this and did some research. There's good news and bad news. There's been a lot of progress in biobags or artificial wombs, in that if you're a child that is going to be born prematurely, even at like 20-ish weeks, which is really, really early, nowadays they might be able to save you, right? And these biobags are capable of doing that. Um, However, uh, growing a human or any animal from inception is like, we seem to be quite far away from being able to do that. Now, we might figure that out over the next 10 years. I think we will, but there's nothing quite would get us there today. um However, though, there are, like, more classical solutions to this problem, like, for example, incentivizing and promoting things like surrogacy could be a potential solution. And I'm saddened that oftentimes uh, around the world, where people have placed restrictions on things like surrogacy, due to kind of nationalistic propaganda type reasoning rather than, kind of anything that's tied to like a well thought out reason. For example, India used to have a very very popular surrogacy industry, and of course there were issues, but outside of those issues, with certain agencies and clinics, these surrogate women were having a really great time and making really good money, and it was like it was a really solid career, or not a career, but like line of work for them. And then and then they banned that for purely nationalistic reasons. The kind of propaganda was like, oh, like all these white people are exploiting our women, kind of thing. And now the industry has died away, and that's preventing just yet another avenue that a lot of other people had to explore if they wanted to have children.
You have to connect the dots for me back to, so is there a large population of people that want to have children but can't have children because they're not able to get pregnant?
Yeah, so it might be people who want to have children but can't have children uh, because they might they're not able to get pregnant, and it could be for medical reasons, or it could be because they're busy, right? And they just like can't fit that into their life. And um, and if there are other people who are willing to carry a child and nurture it and give birth to it, why not allow those people to do that? So Canada, in fact, is a really good example here, because Canada also banned surrogacy partially in that they banned any payments uh, made to be made to surrogates, right? So you can be a surrogate in Canada, but you cannot pay them. Now, you would think if there's no payment attached to this, the surrogacy industry would completely collapse and die in Canada. But turns out there are thousands of women who still do surrogacy in Canada just because they see carrying a child, giving birth to a child, as a really noble, amazing thing to do, and something that how they want to contribute to humanity. And that is beautiful. I think we should celebrate that. And yeah, and I'm not sure how much total impact this would have, but if surrogacy becomes a you know for someone who loves doing it, a thing that they can do and make a living, and feel like they're creating deep meaning for so many people, then why not do it? And I think we should celebrate and promote that.
I certainly agree with that. Now, one thing that you said that like it just hurts my heart is the idea that there are people that are too busy to get pregnant,
Yeah.
but want to have kids because it, as a father, I know how much of my son's personality and his ability to function successfully in the world is tied to his experience of family.
Yeah.
And as a coach who does really deep work on people's belief structures, right? A child that didn't have his parents around to raise him, it generally is going to have a lot more challenges than someone where family was around. And to me, it's like this is one of the sort of not existential, but significant challenges that we face as a society, is sort of the breaking down of the fabric of what it means to be a family and what it means to have a community. Because it's so much harder now in our culture to have a kid and raise a child with a nuclear family than was just a few generations ago, where there was so much family and community just physically co-located.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. And ultimately, if our goal is to get the population to grow again, you kind of want to remove friction from every single step, right? Like you want to remove friction from needing to get pregnant. You want to remove friction from needing to find childcare and support, and you remove friction from how to buy like a nice house and reduce cost of housing and reduce cost of education. There's no silver bullet, and I think it's just like a series of solutions. And yeah, I mean, surrogacy could, and plus other things could be one step in that solution, but then all those things that you're mentioning are totally valid as well. And then you might have your little domestic robot, at least to at least kind of being kind of a nanny. I don't know, who knows. I fully expect my children to learn a lot from ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT is amazing at teaching things. So yeah, that's tutoring for you. So yeah.
I mean, to me, just on that, one of the potential failure cases, right? And we talked about this a little bit before about how we at Google would laughingly, not always laughing, think that the end of the world might be an AI wrapped in a plush toy. I actually worry about this, right? Because when you have a child, oftentimes there's their first toy. Right? Like Killy had Ellie the elephant, right? This cute little super plush and now like totally tattered elephant, but it's not interactive. However, see, we're within, and I have a friend who actually started a plush toy AI company. Within a few years, that is a first thing that a child gets. And to me, what is scary about it is there's a tremendous amount of learning that happens with social interactions.
Yeah.
We're learning what appropriate behavior is like, how to meet our needs while meeting someone else's needs. And there's the friction of these interactions that helps to shape us. But when we have an alternative that is frictionless, like an AI that knows me perfectly, that's non-reactive to my upsets and all this sort of stuff, the primary bond could shift from a parent that is a real human who's loving and caring most of the time and then sometimes gets angry or upset or has their stuff, over to this plush toy that seems to perfectly understand you at every moment. And so I one potential failure case that I could see is that everyone starts to simply prefer the ease and the joy of interacting with their plush AI instead of the inherent difficulty of having a human to human relational experience.
Man, that's such a good point. I have no idea, right? Like we see this with companies like Reactor.ai, where people are spending 2-3 hours a day talking to a chatbot and AI girlfriends and boyfriends and so on. And yes, that emotional safety might make the AI so much more appealing in some ways. And yes, yeah, this is a whole lot of unknown.
I mean, towards that end, and this is purely for research and scientific purposes, I started to investigate because we sort of often don't talk about it, but the amount of porn that's watched and consumed in the world is enormous.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I started to get curious about what's happening on the AI side, and I discovered this whole industry that's just starting up of AI porn girlfriends.
I see.
Right. So I land on this website and it's literally, choose which girlfriend that you want. Right. It's every category from ethnic background, age, size, shape, interest. Right. And here's this AI that more and more is looking very human. And then you can see where this plays out. Oh, it's going to be an interactive game. You can talk to it. You can have sex with it. You can share your deepest secrets to it. Like your point about using this other chatbot that's 2 to 3 hours. Well, imagine if you can then have an interactive Zoom experience with a girlfriend or a partner that really understands you. And I'm finding not a partnership here, but I use our friend's Rosebud journaling app, which is an AI journal that understands me and tracks things over time.
Yeah.
The conversations just keep getting better and the insights just keep getting better. And so this is fast replacing the need for most therapists.
Yeah.
it's 1,000 times more accessible.
Right.
It is tracking me better in some ways. I can ask it to do different
Yeah.
types of therapy on me, which is a limitation. Like,
Yeah.
I could easily see a world where people are preferring AIs to human interaction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really fascinating. We'll find out. Or maybe just talking to AI therapists all the time make every human just be free of, any any imperfections, and it'd be dope to hang out with those humans. Who knows?
I do think that's that is a strong positive, right? For each of
Yeah,
these terrifying scenarios, I do think that is the
yeah,
positive, right? I mean, it's helping me to have more insights about myself and my patterns and things like that. And so,
right.
uh, but to me, there can be some intention around it, right? I mean, if
Yeah,
the intention of the AI at some level is to be in support of you finding real, authentic human connection, that would
yeah.
be powerful. And I don't know that if you're some CEO working on one of these AI partner girlfriends
Hmm.
and understand that, right? Just like the metrics for most
Yeah.
websites, like time spent is the heuristic for the value that
You
you're
know,
providing, and it's
in,
attached to the dollars that you make.
in the longer run, I would take the other side of this bet, right? This is a constant theme that I've seen throughout my lifetime, and even looking at history, like that people get quite anxious and paranoid about any new technology, and then it just like tends to over time kind of turn around and figure itself out. Like a one of the most recent examples that I can think of is when social media first came out, and there was that whole moment in around 2011. Arab Spring happened, and everyone was like so excited about social media. And then going into you know 2014, 15, 16, the whole thing around election interference and all kinds of other things, and social media bubbles forming, and everyone got really negative on social media. And I feel like today we're kind of arriving at somewhat of a balanced point where, a lot of people are not using Facebook or whatever the same way, and I mean, of course, we're seeing negative effects of these things in certain populations as well, but it's not. I would argue that it hasn't been disastrous as much as we predicted, and I've also seen, for every single cohort of people who might be not doing well because of social media, there are cohorts of people who've decided to unplug, who've decided to invest in their mental health because they noticed that this thing was dragging them down that hole too much, and so on. So I have great faith in this kind of self-correcting instinct that humans seem to have.
Right. I mean, sort of the notion that, cars came in and it was this huge benefit for humanity, and then we started having all these crazy car accidents and
Yeah,
deaths, and
yeah,
people were going, let's go back to the horse.
yeah,
And other people said, let's figure out seatbelts,
yeah,
ways to put guardrails on, make it safe.
yeah.
I'm not as I'm I have faith in the self-correcting nature of humanity, and at the same time, I don't know that we're there yet with social media.
Yeah, no, we might not be there fully.
I mean, I've heard things like we have where we have the anxiety generation,
Mm.
right? And there's a whole generation that are growing up experiencing FOMO and things like that due to Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram
Sure.
and things like that, where they're always feeling like they're not enough.
Yeah.
And so, I to me, I have real concerns around that and the isolation that's occurring. I mean, I don't know about you, but you go out to a restaurant and then a bunch of young kids are sitting around a table and they're all just on their phone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No. Yeah. It kind of definitely cuts both ways. And the jury is definitely still out. So we'll find out.
So I had AI generate generate an image here for an artist representation of the future of the CL1 brain in a box.
Yeah.
Inspired by a photo of you that I uploaded.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Uh,
I made that face.
I can see myself making that face.
Right. I don't know if you remember this Saturday Night Live. It's my dick in a box.
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
So
hilarious.
it's
Uh, on that very serious note, maybe one last little tweet that I found interesting that I thought would be fun to talk about is this tweet from Sam Altman, where he asked the question from GPT 4.5. She was asking, so relying on your first principles thinking and not giving much weight to what you've read, what do you think? Is consciousness the only thing that exists, or is that materialistic universe also real? Please try to answer as clearly as you can. And GPT reasons with itself, and decides that, well, uh, you you know consciousness exists, but you don't for sure know material universe exists because you perceive the material universe through consciousness, and yeah, so GPT comes to the conclusion that consciousness is likely the only fundamental existence.
so. First of all, I love this, and the reason I love this is because this has been my own argument all along. That literally, there's never been a scientific experiment or any measurement where that data didn't go through a consciousness.
Yeah.
Right. Even though it had to be observed and all of that, eventually the data had to be looked at and then
Sure.
go
Yeah.
through and process.
Yeah.
And so first of all, I completely agree. Second, though, I would challenge the frame of that question. Sam is forcing ChatGPT into one of two lanes, right? He's not offering it some third alternative, right? In the way that he framed that prompt, right? So
Yeah. No, interesting.
it could be that there's something else, but the other thing that he talks about is Atman is Brahman, right? The inner world is the outer world. And he uses this phrase, and it's literally the exact phrase that Michael Murphy, who founded Esalen, talks about when he had his own spiritual awakening in a Stanford class in the 50s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is he heard that and then boom, he just woke right up to the nature of reality. So I love that Altman had a similar insight here, and then ChatGPT is from a first principles place coming to a similar conclusion.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could just ask ChatGPT about the nature of the universe, and we just like ask these questions? I've been trying, it's and failing at this.
Well, the part that I've been curious about is how much is baked into the AI trying to give an answer that you want. Because early on, I saw some posts where people said, well, I spoke to AI and it told me that Jesus is our savior.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's like, how are you framing the question and the follow-up questions and things
Right.
like that? And that's at some level, just like a child trying to please its parent, the AI is is able to sort of deduce out of very little data, just the input that you're giving it, what is the answer that you really want.
Yeah. So there's a process called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, that AI goes through before it's essentially published, right? And And this process essentially zaps the AI into forming itself or behaving in a way that is pleasing to humans. So it is essentially trying to, like, we're running an evolutionary process to select for AIs that pleases us, and it's not surprising at all. It's trying to give an answer that's pleasing you.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Almost Got It, where we explore what happens with our planet as we hurtle towards technological singularity and explore topics of transhumanism, consciousness, AI, spirituality from this lens of breaking news.
See you in a week.